Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you may be around the world. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Ask a Professional Scrum Trainer. I'm here with Venkatesh Rajamani, who's one of our professional Scrum trainers. My name is Eric Neiberg, and I run operations here for Scrum.org, working for Ken Schwaber, and I'll be your host today. I'll turn my screen off, and it'll be all about Venkatesh in a few moments. Next. See at the bottom of your screen a little Q&A symbol. Just click there and you can ask your questions as they come up in your mind. This is a session that we often run, and we run this as a way for you to get help, to ask the questions that you have. And we bring different professional Scrum trainers in to help answer those questions. Next slide. So just briefly, for those of you new to this segment, who is Scrum.org? Scrum.org was founded by Ken Schwaber, and he continues as our chairman. Ken is the co-creator of Scrum, continues to publish the Scrum Guide, and dating back to UPSLA 1995, where he first introduced Scrum in his paper based on the new product game. Scrum.org provides lots of different things to help based on our mission of helping people and teams solve complex problems. We provide thought leadership like the Scrum Guide, lots of blogs and articles and other things to help you learn and continue your learning. We provide training. Venkatesh, one of those professional Scrum trainers who provide that training. And one of the things that makes Scrum.org training different is the consistency. All of our trainers around the globe using the same content and same material, but bringing their expertise to the training class. All of our trainers have 3 to 5 years minimum Scrum experience. None of them only train. They're sitting on Scrum teams, doing coaching, doing consulting, acting as Scrum masters, actually working and bringing that real world experience into the classroom. Every course has 2 stewards. Those stewards funnel information from the 350 or so trainers that we have to continually improve the course and the courseware, bringing that information out. We have certifications, which are globally recognized. We have over 500,000 people around the world who are certified in Scrum. And then ongoing learning, again, like this webinar, but also we have learning paths and lots of free content on our website to help you keep learning. As a professional, you're always learning and striving to learn. Next slide. So with that, I will let Venkatesh introduce himself rather than me just read his bio, and then we'll start getting to your questions. Venkatesh, all yours.
Hey, thanks, Eric. Thank you, Lindsay, for organizing this. Hey guys, my name is Venkatesh. I'm a professional Scrum trainer with Scrum.org. As you can see, I hold overall 15 years of experience. I'm also a certified enterprise coach. I'm also a coach with ICF. I've been running my own company called Scrum.com with a strong vision to humanize organizations. And I love to humanize organizations by expanding the solution space and also by expanding the number of people in creating such solutions. So I love humanizing organizations. So I think one of the ways we can humanize organization is to unleash the people intelligence. To know more about me, I would recommend you to get in touch with me on LinkedIn. Back to you, Eric.
Great, thank you, Venkatesh. And with that, let's start answering some questions as they're coming in. So the first question, Christina asks, as a new Scrum Master, what are some of the things to keep in mind with a new team? What are some of the large impediments in integrating communications and other issues that you've run into, Venkatesh? And what are some ways to overcome those?
Okay, that's a good question. Way back, if I look up my Scrum Master journey when I started sometime in 2011, I would say the best way to start your career as a Scrum Master and learn some of the nuances is to find a mentor. And I know it's going to be a difficult task, but there are a few things that I would recommend is, I think you would have heard about Shuhari. Learn the rules, implement the rules, and then break the rules. So try to learn some of the stuff. For example, if you're a Scrum Master trying to go and learn Scrum framework and trying to help people adopt Scrum framework, try to learn the nuances of Scrum and especially try to learn the why behind those, because people are very much interested in why behind those things. That's one thing. And I would say you can implement empiricism yourself as a Scrum Master. There are three pillars of empiricism we used to say: inspect, adapt, and transparency. You continuously inspect what you have been doing and you adapt and make necessary actions. For that, you got to have enough transparency on what worked for you and what did not work for you. So I used to have a coaching logs myself in the initial part of the Scrum Master career. I used to introspect every week and see, and then I would take care of talking to my mentor and see what are the stuff that really requires adaptation. And I would also request you to follow some trusted source of information in the beginning. For example, Scrum.org has got a lot of blogs. There is a lot of information out there in the website. I would request go on search for authentic information. So to put that in a nutshell, having a good mentor, learning the rules by the books, and number three, going and frequently inspecting and adapting what you have been doing along with the trusted source of information. So these are the recommendations that I would recommend when you start a Scrum Master career.
Great. Thank you, Venkatesh. And if you have a follow-up question to that, feel free to send it on in. So our next question, hopefully this will be a simple one. Who's responsible for the definition of done? Is it the developers? Is it the entire Scrum team? Who is responsible for that?
That's an interesting question. So I think in the recent Scrum Guide 2020, they made it very good with respect to the accountabilities. Now the accountability of getting the definition of done is with the entire Scrum team. Having said that, who is going to hold that accountable and to ensure that we are meeting all the stuff that we agreed in the definition of done is going to be developers. So the accountability is still with the Scrum team, but ensuring that the things are done as per the agreement with respect to the definition of done is still goes back to the developers.
Great, thanks, Venkatesh. And always remember that definition of done often flows from the organization itself and standards that are in the organization. There may be security standards that have to be implemented as part of your definition of done and other things. It doesn't happen in a silo, even necessarily within the Scrum team, but could be brought in and culminated from a much greater group, and then that accountability falls within the Scrum team.
Yep. I think it nicely puts that if the definition of done is going to be a part of organizational conversions, that is, you may have some standards. So try to include as many people as you can when you're defining one. If that is the context that you're operating, context matters. Context is everything when you're talking about DoD with respect to the org standard. So it is going to be great benefit for you, at least in the initial stages. You involve people from your different parts of your organization to define one such standard if you have. Then you can inspect and adapt your DoD. Maybe Scrum recommends every retro you have to go ahead and do an adaptation of your DoD. So those are the checkpoints you can see if you're in line with your organizational standards.
Great, thank you. So next question, I'll try to summarize it a little bit. It's a little bit long, but can you talk a bit about when something's not finished in a sprint? So if you have a product backlog item that's been pulled in the sprint, it's not finished. Do you generally create a new product backlog item, or do you just pull it back into the product backlog? The problem that this person asking the question has is their team is struggling with how to carrying over items impacts their velocity. Now they're concerned about velocity, which may or may not be the right thing to be thinking about here, but they think it will be showing their previous velocity is lower than it should be. So do you have some suggestions on how they might handle unfinished items and making sure they get credit? It sounds like they're saying in the current sprint as well as in the future sprints.
Okay, so the question is, yes, pretty long. You're talking about three aspects here. One is something is not done. What should I do with respect to the, that particular item? Should I put back this to the product backlog, or should I carry forward the same product backlog and all that? And you're also talking about other two aspects with respect to velocity, which I will try to park aside for now, because to me, short answer is you may not be focusing, or you should not be actually focusing on velocity for the productivity, but you may focus velocity for forecasting. So I'm not going to cover that aspect now. But what can you do with respect to the product backlog item which was taken or pulled inside a sprint which is not completed? So what worked for me, or what I have seen successful teams do, is that number one, they focus on sprint goal. They do not focus on completing or taking the product backlog item and completing like a task, right? So the first thing which is going to be a driving force for you to decide this is to have a strong sprint goal, because sprint goal is going to be really helping you. The coherent product backlogs that you're building, it should have a coherent goal. So it's as good as saying, if you don't have a sprint goal, you're going to struggle on which one to pull or which one to complete when you are getting a trade-off, especially when your sprints are getting rough. Your sprint goal is going to be helpful, right? Coming to the second part of your question, what generally the successful teams do is they try to achieve the sprint goal as much as they can. And in case, let's take an example, at the end of the sprint, you have some spillovers, or some of the product backlog items are not completed. There are two possibilities. One, they get into the product owner and negotiate the scope. Hey, can we slice this product backlog item into two logical units so that one portion of the product backlog item is still valuable that can be released in a sprint, and they can put back the sliced product backlog item into the back to the product backlog, and they re-estimate. Some of the other teams that I worked, they do is they wait until the sprint end and they see if the stuff that is done in the product backlog is really valuable. If they meet the definition of done, if it is valuable, they still choose to release it at the discretion of the product owner. In other case, they take the product backlog item, they don't even go to the sprint review. They take the product backlog item, put back this to the product backlog, and re-estimate probably in their next refinement session. And there's one thing I wanted to add before I close the answer for this question is to how can you not repeat this, occurrences? If one or two sprints you are getting this problem, it's fine. But when you start doing Scrum, it's all about your inspect and adapt points. You got to see what is the real reason of getting this. Is it really a pull system or push system? You got to see. Then leverage your refinement meetings and make sure that the entire team is collaboratively refining the product backlog that can fit into a sprint. I'm sure the teams can learn how they can fit the product backlog into the sprint once they do a few sprints. So these are some of my recommendations. The last part on your velocity. Velocity is just an indication on how fast your teams are moving. But the moment if you start measuring only the velocity, what might probably happen or happen in some of the teams I worked is, we might get into the trap of just inflating the velocity, but not focusing on meeting the goals. So the fair checkpoint, or I would say the actionable checkpoint, is to see whether you are meeting all the sprint goals, and velocity is just going to be the forecasting for pulling some of the product backlog item into your future sprints. That should be the focus. Back to you, Eric.
Great. Thanks, Venkatesh. And yeah, I wrote an article in SD Times not too long ago about velocity and not using velocity as a weapon. We have to remember that velocity is purely a predictor in there to help me predict as a team what we can and can't do and what we're able to do. Velocity for one team is not velocity for another because it's the team, and it's really the team coming together to get accurate and understand what they feel is needed to help them do that predicting. And the minute, as you said, the minute you start trying to really hard measure a team based on velocity, a 3 is now a 5. And guess what? We delivered more. So focusing more on the work and the work being delivered and not the velocity really helps. And then by resizing, right? Give them credit for the work that was done and resize it as you bring it back into the product backlog. Great, thank you. So Bene asks, how can a Scrum team that has to provide 24/7 on-call operations support for the software that they build bring this source of unexpected work into the ongoing active sprint. So, what I'm reading here is, we've got unexpected work. How do we prioritize that into the sprint?
Okay, it is an interesting question. I think one of the most frequently questions that I get in my professional Scrum Master classes: how do I fit into the? How can I start sprint at the same time? How can I fit the ad hoc work that is coming in? Here is my recommendation, right? I wanted to really ask how often that ad hoc work is coming and disturbing your sprint. Once in a while, it's fine because you got to talk to your developers and see how they think, whether you can fit this in, still you can achieve your sprint goal is something you need to go for conversation with your developers. But if this is your nature of work, or often or always you are going to get into this kind of occurrence, I would probably say you got to logically split, or maybe structure your team in a way that one team may be focusing on dedicatedly pulling the sprint backlogs and focusing on the sprint goal and delivering some increments. Probably a couple of team members on a rotational basis that I have worked with teams in the past, they used to focus on this ad hoc work so that one of the values of Scrum focus is embodied in those teams. What happens is, if you don't have a structure, Scrum is not going to be working for you if you cannot commit inside a sprint box, time box, and you have a focused sprint goal, and you cannot meet those sprint goals for over and over again. I think certainly you need to inspect if that is not the way that you're doing Scrum, because there is a reason behind it. There is a systemic thinking that went on why we need to have sprint goals, and that's going to give focus to you. If this is going to be repeatedly coming in, what worked for me when I coached a lot of team is to, there are two options that we did. That is one, number one is see the, if that is going to be coming on an ongoing basis, you got to really let your developers plan your sprint planning like that. For example, in the sprint planning, you got to tell them, hey guys, out of 10 days of your sprint length, 7 days is something that's going to be, you can focus on that. The remaining 3 days anyway, that has been our history, that we always keep getting stuff, and they are going to decide how much they can commit or how much they can pull inside a sprint while they reserve some capacity for their ad hoc works. But I would prefer the option two, that is, if you have a team of 6 people, let's say for an example, one or two is going to be rotationally dedicated for this ad hoc work, while the entire team is going to focus on the sprint goal and meeting the sprint goal. Because if you're going to pull people inside the sprint between two contexts, context switching is one of the biggest killers of productivity and also creativity. So you don't want to do a lot of context switching, because that is going to affect your quality. In turn, you're going to build a lot of technical debts. I'm not extrapolating information, but I'm just seeing from many teams that I've worked, this is what I've observed. So my recommendation is, try to structure your teams and see what is the frequency that you are getting. Go for a retrospective and ask your developers how far you are getting or how frequently these things are disturbing you. In case your nature of work is, you have a set of product backlogs, but 24/7 service is essential for your product. You got to split two teams. One team is going to be focusing on building new stuff. Probably another team is going to focus on the flow, because when you talk about 24/7, I assume that that's going to be a lot of ticket kind of stuff is going to come. Flow based work might be probably work for you. I would recommend you to refer Scrum with Kanban guide. That may be good value addition for your nature of work.
And I think also making sure you're working with your product owner to prioritize things. Just because something comes in doesn't mean it's the highest priority to go out. So always having that engagement to ensure that we're doing the right things. So here's an interesting one that I've heard many times, and I think there's probably a paper on this as a Scrum myth. Is the Scrum Master needed once the team is performing at its best?
It's a good question. So I would probably ask this back. Think about your teams. Think about some of the teams that you had worked. Do they do they consistently do what they have been doing, or you see the team dynamics change? I'm sure, I bet you that you would go with an option two, because teams are not teams from day one. They are individuals. Then they learn with each other, and they understand each other, and slowly they become team. But the team dynamics is going to be one of the biggest parameters. And one of the myths that I'm hearing here from you is Scrum Master role is not just serving the teams. If you see the Scrum guide, and also the real responsibility of the role is to serve three entities: developers, product owners, and the organizations. So, as a Scrum Master, you got to work with these three levels. Only then you should be able to educate all your stakeholders what Scrum is and what Scrum is not. Coming back to the team's maturity, do we need a Scrum Master once the team has got matured? I would probably say yes, you still need a Scrum Master. Probably one of the responsibilities of the Scrum Master is to make himself or herself redundant, so that the teams are going to be self-managing. But having said that, it doesn't mean you're going to completely say we don't need a Scrum Master, because there are two things you need to consider: the team dynamism. I'm saying that people may come and people may leave. That is one of the factors that you need to think. And still, if there are any impediments that the teams cannot solve themselves, they need somebody, right, who they can reach out to, so that they can really work on, or they can really focus on the actual work they have been doing. And somebody who can work with the organizational level, or probably with the product owner, to remove such impediments for them that the teams cannot resolve themselves. So these are some of the reasons. I can keep adding so many reasons on top of it, but you do need a Scrum Master. But I might sound oxymoron that the real role of a Scrum Master is to make himself or herself redundant, so that you can build self-organizing or self-managing team. At the same time, you do need a Scrum Master when there are some impediments that's going to hinder the progress, which cannot be removed by themselves.
And the team's always evolving and always needing to learn. And also, the Scrum Master, a big part of their role is, as you said, to serve the overall organization in helping there. I have seen instances where, as teams mature, a Scrum Master can go from maybe a Scrum Master of one team to a Scrum Master of two, for example. But that Scrum Master is always going to have plenty to do, if you will, and work to go on. So here's a common question, Venkatesh. How do I get stakeholders to attend my sprint review and involved in sprint planning? In this case, the culture of their company is the product owners will just handle it. So how do they encourage that greater engagement to get the right feedback?
Yeah, so I think the question is bit contextual as well, right? We got to understand uh, what is the real challenge with your stakeholders not coming to the sprint reviews, or is it a myth? Somebody is maybe assuming that they don't have to attend these reviews. I would probably ask back my product owner as a Scrum Master, right? How are you getting feedback today? And if it's going to be most of the feedback that is coming offline, how does it work for you? And what are the challenges that you have in ordering your product backlog? Some of the questions I might probably ask my product owner, because that is the starting point or triggering point for me to educate my product owner and make him or her realize the value of bringing the stakeholders into the sprint review. I'm just taking a sprint review as an example, because that is one of the events where we expect the Scrum team plus all the necessary stakeholders to come and collaboratively discuss about the increment that has been built in the overall the time box, whatever the sprint cadence that you want to talk about, and collaboratively decide what to do next, looking ahead, right, including the business conditions. So I might give you a few recommendations which may not fit your, which may not be relevant to your context, because as I told you, you need to understand the context. How do I involve my stakeholder? The first triggering point is you got to educate your product owner. Who are your stakeholders? What kind of value that they are going to bring in ordering the product backlog, or maybe to the product itself? and what are the challenges that we're gonna face if we don't involve them in the sprint reviews, for example. And that might open up a lot of conversations to educate your product owner first of all. If your product owners are not understanding the importance of bringing them, then collaboratively work with your product owner to see if you can have a conversation with your stakeholders. This is what I've done in one of my companies. When I have closely worked with the product owner, then I and the product owner went to the stakeholders and I facilitated the conversation with all the stakeholders. And a couple of stakeholders said, I don't have time. I'm not going to come for the reviews. You guys send me the recordings. And then I asked one question to the stakeholders, like, hey guys, do you think that your feedback need to be adapted in the sprint reviews? Everybody said yes. And we are going to really miss your feedback if you're not going to turn up in the sprint reviews. That requires getting into the facilitation mode and having some right powerful questions, taking a little bit of a coaching stance. So then a couple of stakeholders realized and they started joining the sprint review, and we had a follow-up conversation with the stakeholders. How do you feel about the progress now? And that built trust, right? So that is one thing. There are other ways that you can engage your stakeholders by enhancing transparency and probably getting into the educating mode on what is the importance of we doing these events, and example the sprint review, and educating them and trying to see what are the challenges they have in attending those might probably require a coaching stance from your end to educate your organization. I know that I covered a few aspects, but as I said to you, it depends on the context you are operating. I would probably expect a Scrum Master to take several stances there to see what is the real challenge before going and proposing a solution out there.
Thanks, Venkatesh. So there's several questions around, and you answered one already around sizing and estimation and so on. I'm going to kind of pull a bunch of these, or at least try to pull some of these together. Primarily, they seem to be around, do you have some best practices in estimating? People are finding it's tough for teams to at least get a semi-accurate estimate. Do you have suggestions, best practices, things that have worked for you and your teams?
Okay, I think you can. I'm going to genuinely share some of my views here with respect to estimation. Please give the contempt as it deserves. Please give the same contempt to my response as well as it deserves. First of all, I strongly think, or maybe based on my experience, in my humble opinion, there is nothing called accurate or correct estimation. Estimations are always approximation. That's why it's estimation. It's not the precision that we are trying to say it, right? So when we move towards a complex nature of work from a simple work, the more the work nature is complex, the more the struggling point that we are going to meet with respect to estimation. So while I appreciate, or maybe I would recommend people to estimate and see how it works for the team to forecast, or it's just going to be their intuition to slice or size something and pull into the sprint backlogs, or maybe pull into the sprint planning, then they probably take a few sprints to learn the nuances or maybe the complex work. The more they learn, the better with respect to their estimation, right? So I used to take a simple analogy when I talk about estimation. Think about two corners, right? This corner is going to be the least number one, and the right hand side that I'm showing you is going to be the most then the high points in the estimation. Let's take an example, 100, right? These two hands. Now guess, if you go and tell somebody your estimation needs to be accurate, what is the point that they're gonna choose, do you think? The left hand side, the least one, or somewhere in the middle, or on the right extreme? If you tell them your estimation need to be precise and you need to be rightly doing the estimation, and most of you agree with me that they're gonna go and choose the the greatest one, because the largest one, because nobody wants to go wrong, right? I don't want to go wrong, and I don't want to get the blaming, and I'm going to go and choose the highest number. That is what the estimations are going to do in the real system. If you're going to chase, or maybe probably if someone is going to focus more on the estimation, rather think about this. You focus on the goal. This is our sprint goal. We got to do as a team. And here is how we are going to do estimation. It's going to be approximate estimation, relative estimation, because we don't going to care about the estimation. We're going to really care about the goal. Can we meet the goal or not? Then probably think the same situation. What points that the developers are going to choose? Probably they may choose a least or somewhere in the middle. They don't go and choose the biggest number, because they know that the target is not towards the estimation. The target is towards the goal, right? That's one example on why estimations, or maybe the precise estimation, or focusing more on the estimations, are going to create some harmful effects. My recommendation would be story points is one of the good techniques for doing estimation. There are a whole bunch of resources, I would say hundreds of resources in the Scrum.org website on story points and how do you slice stories. When you go to the resources page, there are some good techniques on slicing your user stories, like by business case, by happy path, by unhappy path, by test cases. A lot of stuff out there if you want to really improve your estimation. But my suggestion would be improving the predictability is okay, but please don't forget that empiricism is going to win always over predictability. Back to you, Eric.
Thanks, Venkatesh. So the next question, do you have any tips on making things more transparent, or really implementing kind of transparency when you're starting with a new team, and suggestions on how they can, to me, it's not written here, but I read this as starting to build that trust so that you can make things transparent and people are comfortable and confident that transparency will be a positive thing.
Okay, so the first recommendation I would say is coaching a team and coaching an individual are two different things, right? So when you're a Scrum Master, you're coaching teams. One of the biggest recommendations that I used to give is team coaching and individual coaching. They're both are two separate things. You got to probably, it takes a lot more time to build trust in a team over individuals. So the first thing, of course, is to be a role model, be a living example on what is transparency. For example, ask permissions before you share some information with somebody. Do not carry conflicts, do not carry information among individuals. Every time when you are getting into the boundary, seek permission. That is one of the ways you can build trust, right? The moment you build trust by being very transparent about your behavior, that's going to create a bit of trust in people, because human mind is going to work with 5 ingredients, right? I used to say status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. If you want to refer, you can refer SCARF. SCARF is a model suggested by the brain science. So if you embody these 5 ingredients in your conversations with people, I repeat, status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness, that's going to really, really do wonders in building trust. And that's the one of the pillars that you need to embody transparency in your teams, right? Coming to the Scrum framework, every element in the Scrum is going to enhance transparency. Try to enhance transparency in each of those elements. I used to say a great Scrum Master always look for opportunities to enhance transparency wherever possible, right? So for example, your product backlog, sprint backlog, increment is going to serve transparency. Artifacts is going to serve transparency. And every event is an opportunity to enhance the transparency by bringing the right state of information to the people. And probably the whole container that you're creating with your teams, some of the stuff that I taught in the past, for example, people related conversation is going to enhance transparency, right? Right amount of information and right level of transparency that people are going to bring, right? That is about people part. The non-human element part, I've already spoken about the sprint backlog, product backlog, and other stuff which you may already be knowing. So try to do the fine level of integration between human element and non-human element in your journey. That's the best way to build trust and transparency in an environment like Scrum. I hope I answered your question.
Great. Thanks, Venkatesh. So next one, and I'll ask the question and I'll give a quick comment and then pass it to you. Do you have any games or gamification or other ideas that you've done to help create and grow successful teams? I attend many meetups in the community and mentor uh, so that I can continue to learn, but want to make learning interesting and fun. And one of the things that I'll mention, and I'll throw this in the chat for everybody to see, there's a great website called tastycupcakes.org, which has lots of different activities and ways to run retrospectives and planning and the like. But then I will leave it to you, Venkatesh, to talk about some of the things that you've done.
Yeah, so tastycup.org is a very good website for designing a lot of stuff with a little bit of a gamification mindset. There is a website called Gamify. You can choose some of the gamification techniques that you can blend in your Scrum teams if you spend a bit of time. There are a couple of other tools I used to do, especially when I am working with team on the retrospective, which is mentimeter.com. mentimeter.com. It has got a lot of gaming stuff, especially some feedback, anonymous stuff if you want to run in retros, value related retros. What are the values that are good for us? People can vote on those values. There's something called Kahoot, Kahoot, Kahoot. They've got a lot of gamification, especially they have done for some of the virtual world after this COVID pandemic. They have really redesigned their website that can match up to your expectation. Randomretros.com is another interesting website that you can explore to run some of the gamification in your retrospectives. These are the things that you can explore. And this gamify.com.org, which I've mentioned you, has got so many the animated games, some of the story building. You can try to give some fillers. People can build their own stories. They've got a lot of techniques on how each team member is going to tell a story, and that's going to build on your screen in front of all. So those things you can leverage if you're interested in building your team building activities and also engage your team members, especially during some of the Scrum events. Back to you, Eric.
Thanks, Venkatesh. So here's an interesting one. What does a typical Scrum Master journey look like? I'm not sure there is a typical Scrum Master journey, but maybe you could talk about yours and ones that you've seen of others.
Yeah, so I think I myself on a journey of a Scrum Mastery. I would say that it's a never-ending journey. I started my first Scrum Master job in 2011 with the Logica CMG. That was my first Scrum Master role. I was a Scrum Master for a couple of teams. I do not even know what Scrum was that time, to be very frank. I started off, it was all a reverse engineering. Then I was a part of a different communities. Slowly that enhanced my knowledge. I took a training, so it added a bit to my feather. I started knowing what Scrum is not. Then I got to engage with a lot of community initiatives. I was a part of a couple of meetups where I started learning a lot of stuff, and I used to replicate in my journey, right? I used to bring back some of the learnings and experiment. That time what happened, that was my journey on the next level, which is I know stuff, but I was not sure about implementing it. I have also written one of the white papers, the stages of Scrum Mastery, right? You can search for that white paper in the Scrum.org website, the stages of Scrum Mastery. I used to call the first stage as like how you used to call as an infant stage is like more of an information dispenser stage. Like I used to carry information and just to dispense that information, right? I was not so matured. Then I started learning what are the different stuff that I can leverage in my Scrum Master journey. That's when I explored some of the coaching techniques. Sometime down the line, 2014, slowly I added Scrum knowledge plus some of the skills like facilitation, coaching, mentoring to the repertoire of mine. Then I became a better Scrum Master a bit. Not a great Scrum Master yet, but a better Scrum Master. Then I worked with some of the good Agile coaches in the industry. I got introduced to a few Agile coaches in 2013, 14. So I started learning different techniques, for example, liberating structures to improve my facilitation skills, agile coaching books and agile coaching podcasts to improve my coaching skills. And slowly I became a better Scrum Master. And one point in time, my journey looked like I'm a great Scrum Master, but I'm not a great coach. I cannot go and coach teams and people and individuals, especially. I was no more of a telling Scrum Master. I don't know how to ask good questions. Then my journey slowly emerged when I learned some formal and professional coaching things. And then I started practicing those coaching techniques in my journey. And slowly I expanded my circle to the next level by going and finding some companies who can give me an access to the organizational level, not just the team level, right? Because I keep talking to team, I don't have any exposure to the outside circle, then I'm not going to practice what I learn. Then I went, uh, I took a risk, I would say. Sometime in 2014, I went and joined a company as an agile coach. I was asked to talk to executives. I was asked to talk to maybe VPs, mid-level managers. I slowly learned. Again, I used to bring back my learnings to my mentors. I used to ask them. I used to do an introspection on how did that go well and how did that not go well and all that stuff. Then with the skills that I have acquired, plus some of the coaching, then facilitation, there are a lot of stuff, right? I need to blend all these skills into the right combination. It took about 3 years for me. 2017 or 16 is when I started working as an enterprise agile coach, representing maybe one full business unit journey towards mastery, I would say. Then that exposure gave me even more confidence to work with a couple of other organizations where I was leveraging these coaching skills very much plus facilitation skills in my journey. So my journey from 2011 to 2020 is like one team, then couple of teams, three teams, then working with a small organization at an enterprise level, then going to the mid-sized firm, getting an exposure to the executive level, finally coming back to a very big organization working at an executive level with all the mid-level managers, then again going back as a freelancer working with a couple of teams plus mid-level managers and executives. So your breadth and depth of coaching is something that you will see when you work in a few assignments as a Scrum Master. So this was my journey. If I have to put it in one line, it is all about expanding my comfort zone and getting into a little bit of uncomfortable zone. And then from there, learning something new from that uncomfortable zone, then try to implement that back without focusing on the outcome. Because when you start focusing only on the outcome, you will be very conscious. So that's how I emerged my journey as a Scrum Master. I hope it was helpful.
Thanks, Venkatesh. So next question, what are the metrics that really matter in Scrum? I'm not sure there are, but I'm not sure this is a either or kind of question, but we'll see what your thoughts are. Which ones are management interested in? And I'll post a link here in the chat to everybody around what are things to look at is certainly evidence-based management.
So I would say which metrics are very useful for our products or useful for our outcomes. That is something that we are trying to do is it's something we should be focusing on, right? End of the day, we are building products for our clients or maybe customers. And if the product is doing good or not, there are certain metrics that can tell or speak about your product. And Eric just posted evidence-based management has got maybe a bunch of metrics that is all actionable metric. It's going to talk about your product outcomes, and it is also going to talk a little bit about the lagging indicators on which you can take some actions so that you can improve your product outcomes, right? Those are the metrics that you should be focusing. Scrum doesn't even talk about metrics. Scrum doesn't even say these are the metrics that you need to be tracking or focusing, because Scrum thrives in self-managing and self-adjusting systems, right? The whole purpose of Scrum is to create done increments, which is going to be valuable, or maybe through which you can learn something else, right? That's all. But how can you make sure that you are going in the right direction? Evidence-based management. You can refer scrum.org/EBM. You have got a whole bunch of metrics that is very useful for everybody on this call. I would say each and everybody, irrespective of your role. If you ask me the second part, what metrics are the management team interested in? I don't know. It depends on the management, because some people may be focusing more on outcomes. Some people may be focusing more on outputs. I'm not saying you don't have to focus on outputs, because outputs are the way that you can move or lead towards outcomes. But when you set metrics that are going to be only output driven, then the whole focus is on improving those metrics, nothing else. So I recommend, even if the management expects some of the metrics that are not going to be so useful, or maybe you think that it's not going to measure outcomes, try to introduce a few metrics that are going to measure outcomes, and try to measure these two metrics in parallel and have conversations with them among these two metrics sets. Which one do you think is more valuable and why? And those kind of conversations can really help people to understand the importance of outcome based metrics.
Thanks, Venkatesh. There's one that I think everybody runs into at times. How do you cope with pressure if your organization is new to Scrum? Can you give some suggestions on how do you explain the ideas? And especially if they've always been exposed to waterfall light ways of thinking, how can you get them to start to change to that agile mindset? I suggest we've got some great exercises in our PSM classes that can help you do that, but some thoughts and ideas?
Yeah, so the only suggestion I have is patience, patience, patience. Because if you do not carry patience, what's going to happen is you're going to boil the ocean on the first day, which is not going to work, because people need a bit of time. And I used to do a lot of exercises in my DSM. One exercise I want to really, tell or share is, I used to ask people, take 10 seconds. I'm going to count 1 to 10. Draw a house. Everybody used to draw a home, and everybody used to draw a traditional home that they have learned in the past, like in the schooling. And I used to show them, this is what everybody drew. Most of the crowd drew this. They said yes. And I used to ask the question, how many people live on this? Most of the audience say, no, no one is living in such homes. Then why did we draw like that? Because we learned somewhere in schooling, maybe in the class 12th or maybe class 2nd, this is how the house looked like. That's how it is. For companies or maybe people that are doing the transformation, they don't have a clue, or they could not visualize what's going to happen in the next 2 years, maybe next 1 year and all that. All they know is what they have been doing. So empathize with people. Don't try to sell your ideas. Try to sell your solutions with respect to the problem statement they are struggling with. I would say, when I say solution, I'm not saying don't go and give solutions. Rather, try to understand their problem and try to co-create or collaborate with them and say, hey, how do you think experimenting this? Try to put your statements into an experimentation mode, because people learn better by doing. When you can, when you can convince people, or when you can promote a couple of experimentation culture in your companies, those experimentations should be strong enough to derive some results and enhance transparency. So, for example, in my journey, one of the managers said, this is how I'm going to track people, and this is how I'm going to measure. No one is working well. I said, how do you think that this velocity is going to measure people? He said, this is what I wanted to improve in teams. Okay, great. I can improve in teams tomorrow. He said, what are you talking? I have given you a goal for the next 1 month to improve velocity. I said, you don't worry about that. You gave me a goal that I can achieve on the next day. He asked me how. then that's the conversation I'm interested in manager. So I'm just taking an example, right? So when you work with people, try to sell your experimentation as ideas as an experimentation, and you co-create that experimentation, and try to create a situation that the ideas are coming from them, not from you. That's the first step. And when you gain a couple of people that understood the the whole purpose of doing this, through them try to promote your ideas, or maybe through them try to seed your ideas to a couple of more people. That requires a lot of patience. That requires understanding the whole environment for the first few days without trying to, you know, go ahead and offer a solution before even they ask for it.
Thanks, Venkatesh. Next question. Uh, Product goal is pretty new to the Scrum Guide. Do you have any suggestions on practices in creating product goal? The product goal is part of your product backlog and so on. I mean, I'd argue that we've always talked about a vision, and that we need something to strive for. But it certainly is a new concept in the Scrum Guide. So, do you have some thoughts on product goal? How do we describe it? How do we implement it? In just in general, some better ideas around it.
Yeah, so there is a blog, I would say, in the Scrum.org website. If you go on the homepage, Scrum Guide 2020 changes blogs are there. If you go down, one consolidated page is available. Eric is going to post that link for sure, I know. There are a couple of blogs that I have written with respect to product goals. I've written product goal is a commitment. So we had this commitment even before the 2020 recent changes. The co-creators definitely did a good job of softening some of the languages they have explicitly called out as a product goal, but previously, to me, it was a product vision. So product vision is going to guide your sprint goals, and sprint goals are going to be the guiding force for your increments and all that stuff. Now, what happened is some companies, when you talk about product goal, context is everything, right? Some companies may have product vision as their product goals, and some company may have explicit product goal statements. So basically, this 2020 had a bit of clarity. It is going to basically fill the vacuum between product vision and the sprint goal. Someone is having a great vision. It's going to be very, very aspiring vision, right? But we don't know how we're going to hit the milestones of those visions. So that's going to be the product goal. And product goal is going to fill the vacuum between your product vision and the sprint goal. Product vision is more of your strategy, and sprint goal is more of your tactical execution inside the Scrum framework, right? And this product goal is going to clearly fill this vacuum between the product strategy and your sprint goal. A couple of examples that I have given in the product goal is a commitment block. For example, when your product goal is going to be little, generally it is little longer, typically, but there is no hard and fast rule when it comes to product goal. This is how you should be framing, and that's how you should be. There's only one rule in the Scrum Guide is at any point of time, you will have only one product goal. Either you achieve them or you demolish, you abandon the product goal before you are jumping into the next product goal, which is going to give you focus. A couple of tips for creating better product goals. I'm sure most of the product owners would love to get into the exercise. You can refer the product goal as a commitment blog, which is there in the Scrum.org, where I have clearly given you some example on. Product goal is a bit of a long-term perspective, and that you can have a little bit of a measurable outcomes. Your sprint goals could be typically several sprint goals may achieve one product goal, or a few sprint goals may achieve your product goal itself. So it depends on the context we are talking. But generally, my view is based on my experience, your vision is going to give you a product goal. And we do a wonderful exercise in the PSPO workshop on taking a business canvas model, doing a visioning with a strategy formulating exercise. And that's going to give you a very good product goal, strong product goals, with an emphasis on how are we going to differentiate our product from our competitors, along with some of the metrics that is we used to bundle the EBM metrics into it so that here is the product goal that I'm writing, and here is the EBM metrics. This is how I'm going to measure my product goal to ensure that my product goal is focusing on outcomes. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Venkatesh. I think we probably have time for one or two more. Here's one. I guess it kind of, we talk about some of this in the Nexus guide and in some other places, though this is within the team. How do you deal with dependencies in the team? That's where most of my organization and many organizations seem to struggle. How can we track those dependencies, and can we track them within stories?
So again, when you talk about dependencies, context is everything. I'm not sure how many teams are working in your teams. Is it going to be scaling, or are all the teams coming under the same container? So Nexus guide has got a very good recommendations. There are a couple of Nexus resources available. I think there are some white papers available under the resources section in Nexus, even one that I published a long back. There are two techniques that I want to quickly put a note so that you can go and refer yourself. One is your product backlog is everything. So when it comes to the scaling Scrum part, let's say you have multiple teams, they are dependent with each other. Your product backlog ordering is going to consider dependency as one of the parameters for sure. So you order your product backlog in a way that you minimize the dependency, and your Nexus framework has got some additional practices to minimize those dependency by having cross-team synchronization. So we call it as Nexus Daily Scrum. These two techniques might help. Another technique is there's something called cross-team refinements, we used to say. So at least 2 sprints ahead, try to do cross-team refinements, like how you do for a product backlog refinement. Representative from all the Nexus team would come to a refinement meetings, and they order the product backlog with a ranking on, hey, you got to do A, you got to do B, only then you can do C. So A and B probably goes to this sprint, and C might only be picked on the second sprint. So that's how you proactively address some of the dependencies when you're especially working with multi teams that are working for a single product backlog or a goal. But hypothetically, I assume that you work with multiple teams, and those teams are not working on a single product backlog. Those teams are working on different product backlogs. Then we need to really see what structure that your teams are working on. Basically, try to see if we can logically group teams into one product goal and minimize the dependencies by splitting the product itself into components. So that requires a lot of work and conversations with the wider audience to see if your product itself is creating such dependencies that cannot be logically grouped, but how can we group into components so that you minimize dependencies between components? I suggest go to Scrum.org/resources, go to Scaling Scrum with Nexus. There are a bunch of white papers available. I'm sure 1 or 2 white papers cover a lot of stuff that you're asking with respect to dependency handling.
Great. Thank you, Venkatesh. I want to be conscious of everybody's time today. And as we talk about in Scrum, try to keep to the time box. So I want to thank you all for participating. There are a lot of questions we weren't able to get to. We will do our best to get to those directly via email following this event. This will be recorded, or was recorded, and will be posted as a podcast on the Scrum.org website and out in podcast world. And thank you again. Thank you, Venkatesh, for taking your time today. And everybody have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, you guys. Everyone. Come on. See you.